Hey guys, we're now on to part 3 of this How to Make Future Bass Drum Grooves tutorial course, where we're going to start to create some drum grooves from scratch. Now, future bass is one of those genres, as I mentioned in the previous video, where there's a good amount of call and response going on between what's happening with the instrumentation and what's going to happen with your drums. And depending on what you like and are more comfortable doing, maybe you're more comfortable programming drums, maybe you're more comfortable on keys, and you're more comfortable programming the instrumentation and the chord progression, I would suggest starting with wherever you're comfortable. Now, in this video, we're going to be starting with just a real simple melody and a chord progression, but we're going to chop up the chord progression as we start to get the drum groove in, because we want some open spaces for snares, and ultimately we want to be able to put some Foley hits as well as some tom fills or maybe even a Foley fill like we talked about in the previous video, but we need space to do it. So let's dive right in. So I have a very basic track going right now in Logic. It is a lead, the 2 lead tracks up here, and then an ARP patch and some chords. Now the reason I wanted to do this, because with future bass, the drums have to fit very nicely with the instruments, or the instruments have to fit nicely with the drums. And typically you want your snare hits to be a little bit more open. You don't want a lot of instrumentation on it. You want to have some call and response. There's no rules with that, but you want to have some element where the drums fill in the gaps of the instrumental, and the instrumental fills in the gaps of the drums. So we're going to listen to that real quick. And before we do, I want to talk about the drums down here. I have pulled in a few different sets of samples. We have some future bass drums that I made that are meant to be used for future bass. Then we have some drums from a sample pack that I did that was for OVO, the genre of, well, not genre necessarily, but the sound of Drake, The Weeknd, that sort of stuff. And then we have a acoustic kit down here. And we're going to look at how all those different things fit with that future bass element, and how this, more specifically, how the acoustic drums don't fit at all. So let's listen to this demo real quick. Right? Pretty basic stuff. And let's go down to the SoCal drum kit, and I'm going to play a progression that we're going to recreate using proper, or not just drums that are better suited for future bass. And you're going to hear a big difference in how using the right samples can get you in the ballpark of a subgenre of EDM. So let's play this real quick. All right, so those clearly don't fit a future bass vibe, right? And it's kind of interesting because a lot of rules in music are meant to be broken, but if you break a rule too far to the left or right of that rule, you kind of risk alienating the integrity of the track, or even the subgenre of the music, right? So that just didn't work. So with that being said, let's start to find some drums that will get you into that realm. And to do that, I'm going to just be pulling some samples from my future bass drum library because I'm really familiar with it. So I'm not saying you definitely need this kit to do future bass. You don't. There are other good future bass drum kits out there. But I'm just really comfortable with this one, so I know my way around it, so I'm going to be using it. Now, the first thing I like to start with is actually a snare. And that's because the snare is always going to be in the same spot, like your main snare, your main clap, right? So a lot of hip-hop producers, for instance, what they'll do is they'll just map out a snare, and then they kind of fill in the kick around it. And that's why kicks in a lot of songs there's more creative freedom to put a kick in an interesting place in music than there is a snare. So let's, especially music that's 4/4. So let's just I'm just going to drag and drop a bunch of snares into Logic. And off camera, I tweaked the demo because I didn't want to listen to that pluck anymore. So it's a little bit different. There's a bass in there now and a different lead, but same chord progression. So let's listen to these snares. Okay, I know I don't want one with the pre-roll, but this one is interesting, and that one. So let's try maybe blending a couple of these together. So what I'm going to do here is just map out where the snares are going to go in the progression. So they're going to go right there. So right, and then what we can do is we just fill that out. And what this will do two things for us right now is it will allow me to kind of get a feeling of the progression and it'll allow me to maybe tweak some of the chords. Now, with this example, I had already chopped in holes in the progression where the snare is going to go. So this is kind of an important thought. So let me move Logic back over to full screen. See how with the chord tracks right here, this one and this one, it stops right there and there's a hole. Same with right here. Well, that's just not coincidentally, that's where the snares are going to be occurring. And Future Bass does this. A lot of genres do this. It gets a very, very different groove bass feel than 4 on the Floor style music. So let's unmute this sample and let's see if we can get a good blend between these two snares. That's actually pretty good right there. So let's listen. I'm going to bring out a little bit of the highs with this guy right now. All right, let's try that. Okay, and I'm also being a little bit aware of some gain staging here as I'm building out my snares. So I might get that one in as well. Yeah, that one does not going to work. Doesn't have enough punch to it. So let's get this one in. This is what we were using in parts of the first video. Let's listen to this. That has the nice snap that I want to go for. All right, so let's copy and paste those out. All right, so I have a little, I call it my mastering chain, but I'm going to take that off and listen to the snares. So see how I'm not clipping? I'm at, even if I turn this up to unity, which would be 0 decibels, I'm still not clipping. So a lot of you guys wonder how I work into this mastering chain. I have a whole video on it on YouTube for free. But yeah, just checking some things, trying to get the snare to work together. So I like this snare right now. This works for me. To move forward with kind of building the rest of the groove. So let's listen to the kick samples we have in here. Okay, now I'm just gonna, those are the kick samples we used in one of the last videos. What I'm gonna do right now though is I'm gonna go back into my sample folder here and we're gonna pull out a lot of kicks. By a lot of kicks, maybe like 4 or 5. And again, I'm just going to drag and drop those into my DAW. If you can use them, import them with a browser, whatever works for your workflow. All right, so I cut to me. We're outside of Logic because I cannot emphasize this point enough. And when I started doing it, it really helped my productions and my mixing. We just drag and dropped 5 kick samples into our session. At any point that you do this, you should do 2 things if you have bass instruments and an instrumental going. First, listen to the kick and the sample with the music. A lot of people will audition a kick or a snare or any sound in isolation, but that's not how it fits into the whole scope of the arrangement in the mix. So first things first, listen to it with the music, even if it's a scratch track. Second, if you have low-end instruments in your production, like right now we have a bass, we have 2 basses that I added kind of in between cuts in this video because I wanted to talk about this. Mute those. And I'll talk about why you're going to mute those as we hear it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy and paste the kick out to the downbeats. And I'm going to do that just so I can hear it happen multiple times in the progression. Now let's listen with all the instrumentation, which includes the 2 basses now. Right? Let's listen. All right, there's that first kick. Now let's bring in the second kick. And again, copy and paste this guy out to the remainder of the hits. I'm going to do that with the remainder of the kicks as well, so I don't have to do this as many times. All right, let's listen. Okay, and again, we're going to listen with this third one. right, so right now I actually don't like any of these 3 kicks. And that's because I'm doing one thing right. I'm listening with the whole scope of the mix. I'm not listening to it just soloing, because if I just soloed this first kick, for instance, I'd be like, oh, I really like that kick. Or I really like that one, right? But it's about how it works with your track. So let's talk about the next thing that I referenced when we cut away from Logic. This sub bass is going to have conflicting frequencies with my kick right now. And unless you get really comfortable and just know that this type of kick will work with this type of production, and that I guess I'll call it a skill, comes with time and practice, it's better to mute the sub and even a low end bass, because it's going to fight with the kick right now, right? And the kick's really important in a future bass track and in most genres of EDM. So now if we listen to this same progression just without the bass taking up the same space, the same frequency as the kick, it might sound a little bit better, and we might be able to be like, oh, this is the kick I want to use. So I really like that one right now. So let's listen to one more. That one isn't big enough for this. So let's go to this one. That one's close to this other one, so I'll drag and drop those up next to each other. And let's listen finally to the last one. I like that one too, but I think it's going to be one of these 2 right here. That's a tough call. So let me delete the other ones right now, because they're kind of clouding my judgment a little. I might leave that one in, but this one right here, I really like, as well as this one. But I think I'm going to use the one above it. All right, so if I bring in the sub bass, though, this isn't going to sound as cool, and I'll just listen to these kicks with the sub because of the issues with the frequency, right? But I know that this kick should work. Let's bring in the bass, the other bass, and see if it has as many issues, because that just would be indicative of having to cut out some frequencies, or maybe sidechain compress the bass so it's kind of ducking out of the way of the kick. But let's check this out. All right, so that works fine, and I haven't treated the frequency response of this bass, and I can do it right now. Let's take out a little bit of the lows at a fairly good slope level. All right, so what I did off camera real quick was I added a couple extra kick hits. Now, I didn't want to show you doing this in real time because of all the drag and drop and copy and pasting, but what I did do was I colored the kick. So all this stuff in purple on this kick track here, that's what was there right as we left it a second ago. The extra kick is just one little syncopated kick hit happening 2 tick marks before the snare. Let's listen. All right, so it sounds pretty basic, but that's because ultimately we want to add some hi-hats. We want to add some Foley. We also want to add maybe a drum fill here and there. And I also would like to get more interesting with the instrumentation if I'm thinking about like making this an actual track. So just having your kicks and snares pretty basic is helpful. Now, there's different patterns of what I would call basic feature bass drum groove kick and snares, but this is a pretty common one. All right, so let's do one last thing here before we jump to the next video, and that's bring back in the sub. And I know this isn't just for feature bass drum grooves, this is just for drum grooves in general. We're gonna get the sub to live a little bit better with the kick. So on this kick here, I pulled up a equalizer and I rolled off just to about 33 hertz and below. I actually want to go to 35 and below. And that's just because I'm anal and weird. And then let's do a 48 decibel slope, so it's quite harsh because there's a sub, right? So the sub should be taking care of more of the sub frequencies than the kick. But let's go to the sub now, and alternatively, we're going to take out some frequencies at about, I don't know, dip at about 100 hertz with a 60.60 or 0.6 slope on the Q factor, right? So we're taking out some of where the kick is living. And I just figured that out by opening up the analyzer and looking that there's a lot happening right here. Right? So there's also happening a lot at 50, but I don't want to take all of it out because it would take too much of the low end. So then the other thing that we can do to get these to live a little bit better together is we could make them better roommates by opening up a compressor on the sub bass, and we could sidechain the sub bass to the kick. So to do that, you just need to have a compressor that has a sidechain input. So Logic's right here says sidechain input. Then you need to just know where your kick track is coming from. So right here, it's called ESWFB kick 04-1. I'm going to then go to that as my sidechain input. So now this kick is going to control this compressor. So when the kick plays, the compressor turns on. When the kick doesn't play, the compressor is off. All right, so I'm going to have the attack down quite low. Let's turn the threshold down a little. So that's just going to make those sit together a little bit better. Now let's listen to it in context of the mix. It's not perfect at all, but it is much better and we can hear it, and moving forward we can keep the sub in and it's not going to make the rest of the mix clash. So I'll see you guys in the next video where we're going to add some hi-hats.